Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell. And would you consider yourself a curious person? I hope your answer is yes, because today you're going to learn some of the benefits of curiosity. And that's just one of the topics I'll be exploring with my guest, Dr. Michele D'Amico. Welcome, Michele.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited about our conversation too. And let me introduce you a little bit more formally to my guests, to my audience, before we get started. Michele is the founder of Vetta Consultants, an organization that specializes in developing leaders and team members who are emotionally intelligent, curious, and resilient. Michele has a Doctor of Psychology degree and is certified as a mediator and as a coach. Her ROE system, which stands for Return on Empathy, educates leaders and their organizations on the power of empathic leadership and the building of safe environments where people want to work. Michele, that is such an important purpose and contribution that you're making. And I'd love for you to start out by sharing a little bit about your journey to doing the work that you're doing today with leaders and organizations.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been a long journey. So I started out really in many moons ago, marketing in computers, and then moved into sales, things of that nature. Never liked any of it really that much. And wanted to do something different. I was in a sales environment at one point where there was no empathy. There was very little and terrible communication, absolutely no psychological safety. And at that point in my career, and I was older at the time, and I just thought, I just can't do it anymore. And so I decided to go back to school, put myself through school, got my master's and my PhD, and found that coaching along the way. And sort of then, it has morphed into, because I started out doing some career coaching and things of that nature, but it's now morphed into really it's a passion of mine, is that, building that psychological safety, using empathy, curious communication, all of those things that make us want to come to work.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad. A lot of times we pursue things because of experiences we had that were not so good in a particular area. And one of the things I noticed with your company is your tagline is reach your peak. Mm-hmm. And I'd love for you to explain what does that have in terms of meaning for you and for your clients?
Okay, lovely. Well, I'll tell you, first of all, Vetta is the Italian word for summit or peak. And and I recently got my Italian citizenship, so all about the Italian. Anyway, it means peak or summit. And it's important for me for all of us, whatever our peak is. You talk about everybody's individual brilliance and genius, and everybody's individual peak. We're not all going to be CEOs, and we're not all going to be owners of companies or whatever, but reaching your peak, whatever that is really important to me. And I do very much believe that reaching that peak in organizations has to do with building this psychological safety, with building our emotional intelligence along the way. So I think that is a peak that we should all strive for, I hope. And I like to bring that into the organization. Yeah.
That's great. And, thinking of emotional intelligence, most people today are familiar with that, but I'd love for you to share the 4 elements or components that make that up and the one that you tend to focus on in your work.
Okay, so, also, I guess that'll lead us into a nice conversation about the difference between empathy and emotional intelligence. So,
Mm.
because there is a difference, they are related, but they're different concepts. And the emotional intelligence, there are those four components. And the one is the self-awareness. So that's the foundation, being aware of and understanding our own emotions. And then there's that self-management or self-regulation. Some people call it that. And that is being able to regulate our own emotions. And then you get into social awareness, which is the empathy piece. So that is being able to empathize, being able to understand and feel others' emotions. And then the last one is the relationship management. And so that's really about building healthy relationships and healthy conflict resolution. So those are the four components of emotional intelligence. And typically, someone with high emotional intelligence will be empathetic, right? They will have empathy. That is not true for someone who has empathy. Does not mean that they will be high in emotional intelligence. So in my practice, sort of bring those two together as much as possible. I can't make anybody feel empathy, right? I can't make anybody feel anything. In fact, you and I both know there are people out there who are incapable of feeling empathy, right?
Mhm.
So I can't make anybody feel anything, but I can instill the abilities, the skills that that encompass that empathic environment, that bring that to work. And in the process of that, really working on the emotional intelligence piece and sort of elevating people's emotional intelligence little by little.
Mhm. I'm curious, don't you love that? We'll get into that shortly. But just thinking about the distinction you just made, what's missing from somebody who might have strong empathy but not have fully developed emotional intelligence? What's the gap there that they sometimes might need help with?
There are a few gaps, really, can be a few gaps. And that's, I would say, mainly is that ability to regulate their own emotions, to understand, to be self-aware. That's the foundation, having that self-awareness first, our own. We can many of us can, we can understand, we can have empathy for someone else who is feeling joy or pain or sadness because we've been there. And so it is a little easier for us to be able to say, oh, yeah, oh, I feel your pain, right? Or I give you space to feel your pain. I'm in it with you, right? Emotional intelligence is really not being in it with you. It's about being aware of mainly aware of my emotions so that I can regulate my emotions and choose my responses and my reactions to things that are happening around me. So I think that there's a big gap there. So it's more of having that self-awareness. And once you are able to bring those two together, then you can start to build those healthy relationships and strong, healthy conflict resolution.
Hmm. As I think about hearing you talk about the, self-regulating and regulating one's emotions, that's something I see in my grandchildren, but I also, who are children, but I also see, unfortunately, in adults who, might fly off the handle or react emotionally in a given situation. What are some tips that you might share with someone who realizes, gosh, I need to do a better job of, they might not put it in terms of regulating their emotions, but this idea of not having a short fuse or not reacting? What are some tips that you might share that would be helpful for people eager to grow in that area?
Great question. Great question. There are so many things, even small things that we can do. And sometimes I'll tell people, so keep a bottle of water next to you. And when you feel your emotion, because we can usually feel it, right? So you become aware of that. When you're starting to feel it, take a little drink of water. Give yourself a second and then respond. That's an easy thing to do. Sometimes it's taking a breath. right? Sometimes it's using a technique that I learned a long time ago from one of my mentors, it called the ear technique, but it involves curious communication. So be curious. So turn it around. So instead of reacting, turn it around into this curiosity. So tell me more. Tell me more. What now? Tell me how that came about, or tell me where you're coming from, or give me some more information. So if you can be curious and communicate that way, it takes the pressure off of you, and your emotions kind of relax, because now you're getting feedback. You're learning something. Hopefully, if if it's really authentic. Right. And you're really curious about this, but that takes a lot of the emotion out of it, emotionality in the moment. And then you can learn something. All right. And the more you learn, the easier it is then to probably to respond and react in I don't want to say unemotional way, because we all have emotions, but without that bite.
Yes. That's, just imagining, and I hope all my listeners will do this, is to think about, especially when someone says something that triggers you, or put another way, someone who triggers you says anything, right? Sometimes
Yes.
it's a single person who, no matter what they say, you find yourself. So I think that's such good advice. And the curiosity piece, I want to, of course, go deeper with you, because one of the things I know you've said in earlier conversations is curiosity is a superpower. So what makes it that big of a deal? Because I agree with you that it is. I want to hear your perspective on that.
Yes, actually, I believe empathy and curiosity are superpowers. I really do. And the reason I look at both of them, so if we can bring empathy or emotional intelligence, and we can bring curious communication into the workplace, then we bring psychological safety. Once we bring psychological safety into the workplace, we've got trust. And once we've got trust, then we have people who work together in a much more collaborative way, who want to come to work. They don't have the Sunday scaries, as they call it, where, every Sunday I'm like, oh, I got to go to work, right? So they don't have the Sunday scaries, and there's just a more collaborative and innovative workplace. So that's one thing. And I also just look at curiosity and authentic curiosity. So I really want to make that clear, because there are many people who will ask a question and then not listen for the answer. They're not really care about the answer. So I think some people call it reflective listening, resonant listening. I call it authentic listening. Do you really want to know the answer? If you really want to know the answer, then we're going to get somewhere, right? And so I think that is a superpower when you can use that, because not only now, what does curiosity mean? It's a strong desire to learn or to know something. That's the definition. And so if you really have that strong, authentic desire to learn or know something, you're going to learn something about the person, you're going to learn something about the situation, about the process, or whatever that is. And once you learn something, we can make better decisions.
That makes so much sense. And, I'm sort of the reverse of that. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, how does somebody like me that is naturally curious ask questions in a way that doesn't feel like an inquisition to the other person? Because I have, in retrospect, when I actually one time remember a guy kind of physically pulling back as I was asking him questions. And I realized, oh my gosh, he doesn't sense me being curious here. He senses something else, either attacking or jumping on him, or, just being too aggressive, I guess. So how do you balance being authentically curious, which I was, with being overbearing from the other person's perspective?
I love that. I love that. I would say there's one simple thing is to say, you ask a question, listen, refer back to what they said. So, this is what I heard you say. Is that correct? Can you tell me more? rather than a barrage of questions about. So
Mm.
just, can you tell me more? I'd love to hear more about that. Or this is what I heard you say. Do you want to add something to that? Or like, I think those are ways to sort of mitigate that feeling of question, that sort of thing. Even though I know you, Meredith, and I know that you are authentically curious and you want to know the answers, yes, people can feel like that's all right. The other thing is not to use a lot of why questions.
Mm-hmm.
When you say things like, well, why did you do that? Or why is that the case? It puts people off. You may want to know why, but there are other ways to ask that question. So I encourage people not to use a lot of why questions, for simply because oftentimes when we use a why question, it comes with a tone. Well, why did you do that? Why do you say that? Right? It comes with a tone, and that tone puts people off.
Mm-hmm. And I've also thought about why can come across as judging.
Yes.
Because we have in our minds that they shouldn't have done it, right? And so
Right.
I think that's part of what they hear when they hear us ask, well, why did you do that? It's like, uh-oh, I'm being judged here or evaluated, or I'm wrong. And that doesn't set the tone for genuine curiosity. So
Right.
what kinds of questions invite people to lower defenses and open up more? Or it may not even be questions, but statements like "tell me more" that you just said. What are some examples somebody might adopt and try using?
Obviously, tell me more. I'd love to understand what you meant by that. Can you tell me
Mm.
more? I'd love to understand what you meant by that. Simple, just because those are the ones that I use all the time. Is I'd love to understand more. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I would love to hear more about that. And really mean that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to say it, but really mean that I want to hear more. And I really do believe that if you use the technique where then you respond initially with, can I tell you what I thought I heard? So this is what I thought you were telling me. This is what I heard, or this is how, right? And can you tell me, did I get it right? Did I get it right? Give them that opportunity so that they know you're listening. Number one, they know you are really caring about the answer. And they have an opportunity then to make a change or a correction or addition, and you get more information.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help?
What I love about that approach is you are truly listening, and you're helping someone actually clarify their own thinking, because they may not have said it as clearly as they wanted to. And by you putting it, saying it back in your own words and getting their interpretation of your interpretation, you're helping, again, clarify the communication that I think is the ultimate goal, right? We want to understand what this other person is trying to share with us.
Right. Sometimes it's just about saying, oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I never thought of it that way. Right. Sometimes it's just that simple. I never thought of it that way. Where did that come from? Or, oh, that's interesting. Right. Those kinds of, so you really do care about where it's coming from for them and how you might learn something new, something different.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, and I think that ties back to your definition of curiosity, this genuinely wanting to know. And so, in addition to the authentic listening, or maybe as a part of the authentic listening, this coming with the beginner's mindset, the learner, the growth mindset of, I could learn something from this person, and not be in that place of judging or being prepared to critique or respond in a negative way. To me, this all ties in with the other area that you focus on of building psychological safety. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, what do you mean by that? And what is the role of the curiosity and authentic listening to building that kind of safety?
Yeah, it's the foundation. Those are the stepping stones for building psychological safety and trust. Since and what I mean by psychological safety, I mean, I know people talk about it all the time now. It's really the opportunity where you put people first, right? So you value them, you respect them, they trust you so that they can come to you with an issue, a problem, or just something that's going on in their lives. Right. And there's people first, they're human. Right. So that's really the psychological safety in a quick nutshell there. And then the curiosity comes with when somebody comes to you. Let's say your direct report comes to you, or anybody in your life comes to you and says, I've got this going on in my life. I spent the weekend at the hospital with my brother or whatever. So then you bring in that curiosity about, well, is everything okay? How can I help? Is there anything I can do? So there's that making a connection there. But you first, so this starts to build that, right? You've got the empathy, and it builds that safety, that trust, but you have to mean it, right? You definitely have to mean it. You got to follow through. Like I talked to some of my clients about having these retention interviews, right, with their direct reports, and asking them, what's going on in your life? What do you need? But then you have to follow through. If you ask them what they need and what you can do, then you have to follow through with it. And if it's something you can't follow through with, for example, if they say, well, I want more money, and you're not really in charge of the budget, then you have to be honest with them. But there are other things you can do. And so you have to follow through. So that starts to build the psychological safety and that trust as well. But you want to be, not just dismiss, oh, I spent the weekend at the oh, okay, well, when are you going to get that done? When is that, when can I expect? So the curiosity is, how can I help? Are you okay? Is your brother okay? And then checking in with them. So I talk about this all the time. It's like it's not just one time, just say, right? Then you check in with them, say, hey, how's your brother doing? Or how's that, what's going on with that? Are you okay? It just every so often, what's going on in their lives. The same thing, the same way you might check in with a friend about, or a family member about what's going on in their lives. And you've got to check in. That builds that wonderful, empathic communication, that curious communication, and then start building on that trust and that psychological safety where they feel like they can come to you.
Mm-hmm. What would you say are the beliefs that leaders have about themselves or about their role that keeps them from really being proactive about developing things like psychological safety?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, they're under a lot of stress to produce, right? They are under a lot of stress to produce. And so that's, being fair, I have to, you understand that. The difficulty is where I hear them say, well, that's a soft skill. That's woo woo. I've heard that before. That's so woo woo, and it's not woo woo at all. I call them, like I said, these are superpowers. These are power skills. These are things that enable your people to come and do the work for you so that you can produce, right? But I do hear a lot of, it's less now than it was honestly before COVID. I do feel like people are understanding, okay, they see that also they're losing employees, and they're losing employees because they don't feel respected, they don't feel valued, they don't feel understood or heard. And that's coming out in the exit interviews. And so they're starting to see, oh, well, maybe I need to focus a little bit here in this area. There was a recent Gallup poll for 2023 that came out about there were, I think they said 23% of employees said that they were actually thriving at work. Only 23%. So they asked them, they asked the other people, what would you want to improve in your workplace that might help you thrive or whatever, for the other 70%, 70-some percent. And they said to feel respected, to feel valued and recognized for the good work that we do, and to have a boss who is more approachable. 41% said that. It's huge. And so what does approachable mean, right? I mean, approachable, sure. People, your direct reports can maybe come to you and say, hey, you know what, the project, is behind schedule, da, 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 da. But are you approachable enough for them to be able to work with you on a solution and be able to come to you before it's too late and say, hey, we need your help, right? Are you approachable enough? Have you built that psychological safety and that trust? I think obviously you're talking to somebody who firmly believes that this is the foundation for getting people to work together and to, years and years ago, work was separate, right? We had our home life, we had our work life. You've heard about this. So that is just not the case anymore. And especially with the younger people, right? It is all one thing. They come into work, the people that they are, right? And what's going on in their life. And they want to be recognized for that. They want to be valued for that. I think that it's really important. And I do think that a lot of CEOs, C-suite are starting to recognize that. HR people, at least that's what has been my experience when the HR people reach out to me. We're losing people because they're saying that they do not feel valued, they don't feel understood, their boss is not, and so they're bringing me in to talk about those things and to help build that.
Well, it's interesting. I want to circle back to a phrase you used earlier, which was retention conversations. And so what do you recommend? Well, first of all, define what you mean by that, and then what goes into one of those types of conversations so that we don't get to the exit interviews.
Yeah, right. So kind of heading that off at the pass, hopefully, right? It's a retention interview, or some people call them the stay interviews. And that is really interviewing each individual on your team. Once every 6 months, I say, is a great time to do it. Separate from any of the other meetings you have with these people, right? Any of the other meetings. So it's not part of your weekly one-on-one or your monthly one-on-one. It's completely separate. And the questions are, and the atmosphere is, who are you as a person? What do you need to grow your skills? What are you looking for? Where would you like to be? What can I help you with? How can we as an organization help you grow? Those kinds of things. What are you looking for? What makes you feel valued? That's another question. And how do you like to be recognized? Because some people like to be recognized in a big meeting, right? And other people, not so much. They just, they're fine if you just send them a nice email or give them a call and say, hey, just want you to know you're doing a great job. So who are you as a person? That's a retention interview. So then your team walks away feeling like this person is curious about who I am. This person cares. So that's why I talk about the the C's of communication, and that's seeking clarity. And in order to seek clarity, you have to be curious, and then caring. You have to care about the answers. And so they walk away feeling that way. Now, once again, as I mentioned before, you have to follow through. All right. So you can't just say, what can we do as an organization, and then let it go. You have to follow through with that. If someone says, I really would like some new computer skills or whatever it is, or some management training, you've got to follow through with that because there's the trust, right? Yeah.
Oh, well, yes, I wonder if it could do more damage if you ask and don't do anything about it versus not asking at all. Because you've set them up for an expectation that something good is going to happen. If it doesn't, it's like, well.
Yeah, I have a situation like that right now. So case in point, where the direct reports, the team is saying to me, well, we're so happy that you're here and working with our manager, our director. We're happy that you're doing that. However, we've seen some of this before and it doesn't stick, right? And so you're like, they're not sure, so they're still reserved about it. They're still not on board. And so then there's that, right? The next part. It's okay, how do we make this stick, right?
Well, yeah, that lack of commitment, was, and I know that's another key area that you're focused on with folks. It's not just saying this or, acknowledging this is important, but their commitment to actually do something about it. What have you found to be effective? Because I know so many of us, have good intentions, but somehow the commitment to follow through isn't always there. What is something a manager or a leader might do to make sure that they actually do follow through with what they said they were going to do, or what they asked about and the person expressed a need for, and the leader agreed with them? Then what?
So if I'm still working with them, then I try to hold them accountable, okay, for the time being, until they start realizing that, okay, when you do this, you get good results, right? If I'm not working with them, or sometimes even if I am, I ask them to have their direct reports hold them accountable. So I have them check in. Hey, how's it going? Here's what, blah, 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 here's what we talked about, and how's it going? Do you think that'll happen soon? What are, checking in with them, to hold them accountable, because they need to be held accountable as well. So that's a sort of a little piece of managing up, right? Mm-hmm. We all want to manage up as well as down. And so managing up, but holding them accountable. Mm-hmm. But you hit the nail on the head with commitment. So they have to really have that commitment to want to make this work.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine, and you tell me if this is what you do, when you're working with a leader and the team, are you challenging each of them to speak up and, bring up these topics that have been committed to? So in other words, building commitment within and across the team, not just with an individual.
Absolutely, without a doubt. It's very, very important, with a caveat. So the caveat is, if we haven't built some psychological safety to begin with, it's very difficult for the direct reports to manage up in that way. It's difficult for them to hold their managers accountable. It's scary. It's very scary, because we haven't built that safety in there. We haven't built that that communication going back and forth. We haven't built the empathy. We haven't built any of that. So that starts first, just really making sure that is right, that we can build that foundation. Once we build that, then it's easier for direct reports to hold their managers accountable. Hard to do that when you're right. I mean, because it can be scary.
Well, sure, especially if in the past the pattern of behavior for the leader has not been to invite questions, to invite input or feedback. And so, people notice, they learn quickly whether it's safe or not to speak up, to be honest. And so if there's been that kind of dynamic in the past, I'm guessing you have your work cut out for you for trying to help them become more trusting of each other, that they can count on the person they're sharing this with to react with emotional intelligence. It's all related. It's all connected.
It is all related. It is. And you're right on point with that. So building that foundation, if I'm being brought in because that foundation isn't even there, then we've got to start there. There's just no, and then even with that, there has to be a commitment on the part of the organization and a part of the person that I'm working with, right? It has to be a commitment that I see where this, and I always say, well, so tell me what your return on empathy is. You know what your return, right? Your ROI is. What's your ROE? Have you, do you want a better ROE? Would you like that? And then when we get down to brass tacks and we really talk about what that's all about and building that safety and that psychological safety and that trust, then we start building, hey, this is going to work. It's going to help. So,
well, I think that's so important. That foundation has to be put in place. So assessing where they are up front and then realizing what has to be done allows you to then determine the start point, I would think.
Right. Oftentimes that 360 is pivotal. Right. So the 360, being able to talk to all these people, being able to do interviews with them, and bringing it back to the the person that I'm working with, bringing it back to them, because so often there is no self-awareness, and so bringing back to that. Okay, well here's what people. Here's the good. Here's your strengths. Let's build on those strengths to kind of shore up these things that you could improve upon so that your team, wants to work for you and your team gives you what you need.
Yes. Thank you. Well, Michele, as we come to a closure here, is there anything we haven't touched on around these topics that you think would be especially valuable to leave my listeners with?
I would say that authentic, curious communication is really it's the cornerstone. If you can and listening to what you're hearing is really it. And if you can do that with your people, I think you start to build empathy, in yourself too, because you start to connect with that person. And so I think, if we can have communication that thrives in an environment of empathy, right? We're good.
Great. Thank you. I think you've given my listeners some really important points to ponder about themselves, their own leadership, and where certain elements that you've talked about might serve them well if they were to dig deeper and develop them more. Michele, for those that want to get more information about your services and to connect with you, share how they can do that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, of course. Connect with me on LinkedIn. It's LinkedIn, .com/in/Michele D'Amico. And my Vetta Leaders is my website. So go there. You can connect with me there. Connect me with LinkedIn. And my email is michele@micheledamico.com with one L. Michele with one L.
That's true. And we'll have everything but your email address on our show notes page. Michele, thank you so much for being with me today and for the important work you're doing in organizations with leaders and team members alike. This whole area of emotional intelligence, of curiosity, and of that authentic listening, they're so critical to forming relationships where people can thrive. So I want to acknowledge you for that important contribution you're making in this really important area.
Thank you so much. And I love your podcast, says it all, Growing Strong Leaders. So I love it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free facilitator guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.